The sharp crack of a gunshot sent a flock of crows scattering into the dusty Wyoming sky as Fiona Prescott ducked behind an overturned wagon, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild Mustang. 3 days of traveling alone through unforgiving territory, and now this bandit's attacking what remained of the stagecoach that had been meant to carry her to Sweetwater Springs. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new life seemed to be evaporating like morning dew under the merciless western sun. Fiona's trembling fingers clutched the small leather pouch containing her last $5 and the crumpled advertisement that had brought her west. Her parents' deaths from influenza had left her with nothing but debts and memories in Boston. The advertisement offering positions for respectable women seeking employment in the territories had seemed like divine providence. Now, with the stagecoach driver dead and the other passengers scattered or worse, that providence felt more like cruel fate. Another shot rang out, splintering wood mere inches from her head. Fiona bit back a scream. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its pins, and dust caked her once fine traveling dress. She had never felt more alone, more desperate, more certain that her 22 years of life were about to come to an abrupt end. "Stand up nice and slow, miss," a gravelly voice commanded. "We ain't got all day, and them valuables you're hiding ain't worth dying over." Fiona closed her eyes, her mind racing through limited options. There was nowhere to run across the open plain, no help in sight. Perhaps if she surrendered her few belongings, they might spare her life. She slowly began to rise, her legs quivering beneath her skirts. The next sound wasn't another gunshot, but something equally explosive: hoofbeats, pounding across the hard, packed earth, growing louder by the second. The bandit's attention shifted, and Fiona dared to peek around the wagon's edge. A lone rider approached at breakneck speed, rifle raised, dust billowing behind him like a storm cloud. His black hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but even from a distance, Fiona could see his determined posture as he charged directly toward the ambush. "It's Xavier Hammond." One of the bandits shouted, panic evident in his voice. "Let's get out of here." The bandits scrambled for their horses, firing wildly in their retreat. The newcomer returned fire with deadly precision, dropping one man before the others managed to escape over a nearby ridge. When the dust settled, Fiona remained frozen behind the wagon, unsure if her savior might prove just another danger. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, securing his horse before approaching the wreckage cautiously. "Anyone still alive out here?" His voice was deep but gentle, lacking the harsh edge of the bandits. Fiona gathered her courage and stood on shaky legs. "I'm here," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. The man turned, and Fiona got her first clear look at Xavier Hammond. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm, he cut an imposing figure against the vast landscape. A thin scar traced his jawline, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his face. He couldn't have been more than 30 years old, but his eyes held the weathered look of a man who had seen far more than his years suggested. "You hurt, madam?" he asked, quickly scanning the horizon for any sign the bandits might return. "No, I don't believe so," Fiona managed, though her voice wavered. "The driver, he didn't survive the initial attack." Xavier nodded grimly, removing his hat as a gesture of respect before returning it to his head. "Garrison gang, most likely. They've been hitting stagecoaches all month." He glanced at the scattered luggage and broken crates. "You traveling alone?" "Yes." Fiona straightened her back, trying to reclaim some dignity despite her disheveled appearance. "I was bound for Sweetwater Springs." "That's still 15 miles northeast," Xavier said, frowning slightly. "Not a journey to make on foot, especially with those vultures possibly circling back." He gestured toward the ridge where the bandits had disappeared. "I have no choice," Fiona replied, gathering her small carpet bag, miraculously unscathed in the attack. "I have an employment opportunity awaiting me there." Xavier's expression shifted to curiosity. "What kind of employment?" Fiona hesitated. In Boston, her position as a governess had been respectable enough, but she knew the territories operated under different social codes. I answered an advertisement for women seeking positions. Something darkened in Xavier's eyes. What's your name, Miss Fiona Prescott? Miss Prescott, I'm afraid those advertisements aren't always what they seem. Sweetwater has grown fast with the mining operations, and not all establishments there are suitable for a lady. The implication hit Fiona like a physical blow. I assure you, Mr. Hammond, I have no intention of working in any improper capacity. The advertisement specified housekeeping positions. Xavier didn't look convinced, but he didn't press the matter. Instead, he surveyed the wreckage once more before coming to a decision. My ranch is about 5 miles from here. You can rest there tonight, and tomorrow I'll see about getting you safely to town, assuming that's still what you want. The offer of shelter was too tempting to refuse, especially with the sun already beginning its descent. Fiona nodded gratefully. Thank you, Mr. Hammond. I won't impose any longer than necessary. A ghost of a smile crossed Xavier's face. Out here, neighborliness isn't an imposition, Miss Prescott, it's survival. He helped her onto his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, before mounting behind her. Fiona stiffened at the unexpected proximity, but as they set off across the plains, she found herself grateful for the warmth of another human being after hours of terror and solitude. The Hammond Ranch came into view just as twilight was painting the landscape in shades of purple and gold. Nestled in a small valley with mountains rising in the distance, the property was more impressive than Fiona had expected. A substantial 2-story house stood as the centerpiece, with several outbuildings and corrals spread around it. A bunkhouse sat off to one side, smoke curling from its chimney. This is all yours. Fiona couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Started with 40 acres and 6 cattle 8 years ago, Xavier replied, a hint of pride in his tone. Now it's 2,000 acres and nearly 500 head. The Triple H is modest compared to some spreads, but it's home. As they approached the main house, a tall, lean man with graying hair emerged onto the porch, rifle at the ready until he recognized Xavier. That you, boss, wasn't expecting you back till tomorrow. Change of plans, Hank, Xavier called back. We've got a visitor who needs some looking after. The foreman's eyebrows rose as he noted Fiona, but he simply nodded and stepped forward to take the reins as they dismounted. Miss Fiona Prescott, this is Hank Miller, my foreman and the best cattleman in 3 territories, Xavier said. Hank, Miss Prescott had a run-in with what I'm guessing was the Garrison gang. Stagecoach ambush about 5 miles south. Hank's weathered face creased with concern. Anyone else make it? Xavier shook his head, and Hank muttered something under his breath that Fiona pretended not to hear. Mrs. Abernathy still around? Xavier asked. Left about an hour ago, said her sisters got the influenza over in Elk Creek. Xavier frowned. That's inconvenient timing. He turned to Fiona. Mrs. Abernathy is our cook and housekeeper. Comes in daily from town, but it sounds like she'll be away for a while. I'm sure I'll manage just fine, Fiona assured him, though the thought of being the only woman at her ranch full of cowboys sent a flutter of anxiety through her stomach. Xavier led her into the house, which was surprisingly well appointed for a bachelor's residence. The main room featured sturdy but handsome furniture, polished wooden floors partially covered by woven rugs, and a large stone fireplace. Bookshelves lined one wall, an unexpected sight that immediately raised Fiona's estimation of her host. It's lovely, she said sincerely. Mrs. Abernathy insists on certain standards, Xavier replied with a slight smile. She claims I'd live like a savage otherwise, and she's probably right. He showed her to a small but clean bedroom on the 2nd floor. This was my mother's sewing room before she passed. Mrs. Abernathy uses it occasionally when weather prevents her return to town. The room contained a narrow bed, a washstand with pitcher and basin, and a small wardrobe. Simple but far more comfortable than Fiona had dared hope for after the day's events. I'll have Hank bring up some hot water for washing, Xavier said. There should be a nightgown and some other necessities in the wardrobe things Mrs. Abernathy keeps here. You're very kind, Mr. Hammond, Fiona said, suddenly overcome with the realization of how differently this day might have ended without his intervention. Xavier, he corrected her. Mr. Hammond was my father, and he's been gone 10 years now. His eyes softened slightly. Get some rest, Miss Prescott. We can talk more in the morning about your plans. After he departed, Fiona sank onto the edge of the bed, physical and emotional exhaustion washing over her in waves. When Hank brought the promised hot water and a tray with bread, cheese, and tea, she barely managed to thank him before he retreated, clearly uncomfortable in a lady's bedroom. Alone at last, Fiona washed away the dust of travel and changed into the borrowed nightgown, which was several sizes too large but blissfully clean. As she sipped the tea, she found herself studying her surroundings more carefully. A small framed sampler hung on the wall, with the words "Home is where love abides" carefully stitched in faded thread. Beside it was a daguerreotype of a handsome couple, the man bearing a strong resemblance to Xavier, the woman smiling gently at the camera. Fiona wondered what had become of the family that had once filled this house. Xavier had mentioned his parents' passing, but had said nothing of a wife or children of his own. For a man who had built such a successful ranch, it seemed strange that he would live here alone save for a visiting housekeeper. Sleep claimed her before she could ponder further, her dreams filled with gunshots and galloping hooves and storm-gray eyes watching over her. Morning arrived with the scent of coffee and bacon wafting up the stairs. Fiona dressed quickly in her travel-worn clothes, wishing she had something fresher to wear. Her larger trunk had been on the stagecoach, likely looted by now if the bandits had returned to the scene. Downstairs, she found Xavier at the stove, competently managing several pans at once. "Good morning," he greeted her without turning around. "Hope you're hungry. I'm no Mrs. Abernathy, but I can manage the basics without burning down the house." "It smells wonderful," Fiona said, surprised to find her appetite had returned after yesterday's ordeal. "May I help? You're a guest, Miss Prescott. Please call me Fiona," she offered, moving to the table to arrange the plates and utensils that had been set out. "And I'd prefer to be useful rather than idle." Xavier glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "Most ladies I've known would happily accept being waited upon." "Perhaps I'm not most ladies," Fiona replied with more spirit than she'd intended. "Besides, where I'm going, I'll be doing far more than setting a table." Xavier transferred crisp bacon onto a plate. "About that, I sent Hank into town at first light with a message for Sheriff Taylor about the stagecoach attack. He'll also make inquiries about this position you're seeking." Fiona stiffened. "That wasn't necessary. I have the advertisement right here." She retrieved the folded paper from her pocket and handed it to him. Xavier studied it as he brought the food to the table. His frown deepened as he read. "The Silver Slipper. That's not a reputable establishment, Fiona." "The advertisement clearly states they seek housekeeping staff," she insisted, though a knot formed in her stomach at his expression. "I'm sure it does. And I'm equally sure that once women arrive, they discover housekeeping includes services of an entirely different nature." He set the paper down. "The Silver Slipper is a saloon and gambling hall with rooms for rent upstairs. Those rooms aren't rented for sleeping, at least not only for sleeping." Fiona felt the blood drain from her face. "You're suggesting it's a house of ill repute," "Not suggesting. Telling you plainly." Xavier's voice was gentle despite his blunt words. "You wouldn't be the first Eastern woman lured west under false pretenses. These establishments no respectable women wouldn't come if they knew the truth." Fiona sank into a chair, her appetite vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "What am I to do now? I've spent nearly everything I had on the journey here." Xavier sat across from her, pushing a cup of coffee in her direction. "You have options. Sweetwater Springs has a proper hotel that sometimes needs maids. The school might need an assistant," or he hesitated before continuing. "Or you could stay here, at least temporarily." Fiona's head snapped up. "Stay here as what exactly?" "As I mentioned, Mrs. Abernathy has gone to care for her sister. I have no idea how long she'll be away. Influenza can linger for weeks. The house needs looking after and the men need feeding. I'd pay you fairly for your work." Fiona considered the offer. Working as a servant in a bachelor's home wasn't what she had envisioned, but it would provide immediate shelter and income while she searched for something more permanent. And despite his intimidating appearance, Xavier Hammond had shown himself to be honorable. "I would be your housekeeper then." She clarified, "In title, yes." Xavier met her gaze directly. "But I want to be clear, you wouldn't be a servant here, Fiona. You'd be the lady of this home while you stay, managing it as you see fit." The unexpected declaration left Fiona momentarily speechless. "That's very generous." "It's practical," Xavier countered, though something in his eyes suggested there might be more to the offer than mere practicality. "A house needs a woman's touch, especially with a dozen hungry cowboys expecting regular meals." "I should warn you that while I can cook simple meals, I'm not experienced in cooking for large groups," Fiona admitted. "Mrs. Abernathy keeps detailed notes in a ledger in the pantry. Quantities, preferences, schedules, she's very organized." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Besides, cowboys aren't known for being particular about food, so long as there's plenty of it." Fiona took a sip of coffee, using the moment to gather her thoughts. "I accept your offer, Mr. Hammond Xavier, temporarily until I can secure more permanent arrangements." "Good." He nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "We'll ride into town tomorrow to retrieve whatever supplies you need and see about your trunk from the stagecoach. For today, there should be some of my mother's old dresses in the trunk in your room. Mrs. Abernathy kept them for sentimental reasons, but I'm sure she wouldn't mind you making use of them." "Thank you. I'll take good care of them." They ate breakfast in companionable silence after that, Fiona's mind already cataloging the tasks that would need attention. The house was clean but showed signs of bachelor living boots by the door that should be on a rack, newspapers scattered rather than neatly stacked, a layer of dust on the bookshelves that Mrs. Abernathy had clearly been unable to reach before her departure. After breakfast, Xavier showed her around the house more thoroughly, explaining the kitchen systems Mrs. Abernathy had established and introducing her to the pantry, root cellar, and washroom. The tour ended at a small office off the main room. "This is my domain," Xavier said, opening the door to reveal a space lined with ledgers and maps. "You're welcome in here anytime, of course, but I handle all the ranch business myself." "Do you manage entirely alone?" Fiona asked, impressed by the meticulous organization of the records visible on the desk. "Hank oversees the day-to-day operations with the cattle and men, but yes, I handle the business side myself." There was no boasting in his tone, just simple fact. "My father believed a man should understand every aspect of his livelihood, from the dirt to the dollars." "A wise philosophy," Fiona agreed. "My father was similar in his approach to his law practice, though it didn't save him from financial ruin in the end." The words slipped out before she could stop them. She hadn't intended to reveal so much of her personal circumstances so quickly. Xavier studied her with those perceptive gray eyes. "Is that what brought you west? Financial necessity?" Fiona nodded, seeing no point in pretense. "My parents died within weeks of each other last winter. Influenza. When their affairs were settled, I discovered my father had made some unfortunate investments. The house and most possessions had to be sold to cover debts." "I'm sorry for your loss," Xavier said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "Losing both parents so close together must have been devastating." "It was," Fiona acknowledged, surprised by how easily she could speak of it with this near stranger when the topic had been almost unbearable with acquaintances back home. "But dwelling on grief won't change circumstances. My parents would want me to forge ahead." "That's the spirit that built the West," Xavier said with approval. "Speaking of which, I need to check on a few things with the herd. Will you be all right on your own for a few hours?" "Perfectly fine," Fiona assured him. "I have plenty to occupy me here." After Xavier departed, Fiona explored the trunk in her room as he had suggested. Elizabeth Hammond had been a woman of refined taste, judging by the quality of the dresses stored there. Most were at least 10 years out of fashion but made of excellent materials. Fiona selected a simple blue cotton dress that required only minor adjustments to fit her slightly smaller frame. The familiar work of needle and thread soothed her as she sat by the bedroom window, looking out over the ranch yard where cowboys moved purposefully between tasks. In the distance, she could see riders working with cattle on the rolling grassland that stretched toward the mountains. By mid-afternoon, Fiona had altered the dress to fit, thoroughly cleaned the kitchen, and begun preparations for the evening meal. Mrs. Abernathy's ledger proved invaluable, with detailed instructions for quantities needed to feed the ranch hands and recipes adapted for cooking in large batches. As Fiona worked, she found herself humming softly, something she hadn't done since before her parents' deaths. There was something about this place, the open sky visible through the windows, the honest simplicity of the tasks at hand, perhaps even the lingering presence of Xavier Hammond that lightened her spirit in unexpected ways. The sound of boots on the porch interrupted her thoughts. Hank entered, removing his hat respectfully as he crossed the threshold. "Afternoon, Miss Prescott. Something sure smells good in here." "Just beef stew for this evening," Fiona replied. "I hope it meets everyone's expectations." "Anything hot and plentiful will do that," Hank assured her with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "I wanted to let you know I spoke with Sheriff Taylor in town. He's sending men out to the stagecoach site, but he doesn't hold much hope for recovering belongings." Fiona's heart sank at the news, though she'd been preparing herself for this likelihood. "Thank you for inquiring, Mr. Miller. Just Hank, please, miss, and there's more. I asked about that silver slipper place." His expression darkened. The boss was right. "Not the sort of establishment for a lady like yourself." "So I've been informed," Fiona said, managing a small smile despite her disappointment. "It seems I've had a fortunate escape thanks to Mr. Hammond." "Xavier's got good instincts about people," Hank said, moving to wash his hands at the pump by the sink. "Been that way since he was a boy. His father always said he could read a man's character faster than most could read a newspaper headline." "You've known him a long time, then." "Since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, worked for his father before him." Hank dried his hands on a towel. "Good family, the Hammonds. Built everything you see here from nothing but hard work and fair dealing." Fiona sensed an opportunity to learn more about her enigmatic host. "Xavier mentioned his parents passed away. Has he never married?" If Hank found the question improper, he didn't show it. "There was a girl once, about 5 years back. Emily Carson, daughter of a rancher over in the next county. Pretty little thing, but city-raised. Her father sent her out here thinking the country air would be good for her health." "What happened?" Fiona prompted when Hank paused. "Winter came. First big blizzard, and she was on the next train east." Hank shook his head. "Can't really blame her. Life out here isn't for everyone, especially women raised with certain comforts. But it hit Xavier hard. He'd already ordered lumber to add a new wing to the house." The story filled in some of the puzzle pieces Fiona had been contemplating. The house that seemed too large for a single man. The careful way Xavier had phrased his offer to her, emphasizing she wouldn't be a servant. "That's unfortunate," she said softly. "He seems like a good man." "The best," Hank agreed. "Just needed to find a woman with enough backbone to match his own." He cleared his throat, perhaps realizing he'd said more than intended. "Anyway, I should get back to work. The men will come in around 6 for supper if that suits." "That will be fine. Thank you, Hank." After he left, Fiona returned to her cooking with renewed determination. She might only be here temporarily, but she would ensure the household ran smoothly during her stay. Xavier Hammond deserved no less after his kindness. The cowboys arrived promptly at 6, filing into the bunkhouse where meals were typically served. Fiona had prepared enough stew, biscuits, and apple cobbler to feed a small army, following Mrs. Abernathy's precise instructions. She felt a flutter of nervousness as she served the first few plates, but the men's enthusiastic appreciation quickly put her at ease. Xavier arrived last, having been out with the most distant portion of the herd. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Fiona in his mother's dress, but he made no comment beyond a nod of approval. "Smells like Mrs. Abernathy never left," he said, accepting a heaping plate. "High praise indeed," Fiona replied with a smile, "though I followed her recipe to the letter, so the credit is hers." "Following instructions correctly is its own skill," Xavier countered, taking a seat at the head of the long table. Many can't manage even that much. The meal proceeded with the good-natured banter of men who worked hard together daily. They were careful with their language in Fiona's presence, she noticed, and several had clearly made efforts to clean up before coming to supper. As the men finished eating, Xavier stood and cleared his throat. The table immediately fell silent. For those who haven't met her yet, this is Miss Fiona Prescott. She'll be managing the house while Mrs. Abernathy is away. His gaze swept the table, quietly authoritative. I expect you all to show her the same respect you'd show your own mothers or sisters. Murmurs of agreement and nods circled the table. Fiona felt a warm flush of gratitude for Xavier's public acknowledgement of her position and the boundaries he was establishing. Miss Prescott had a rough journey here, Xavier continued. Stagecoach was hit by the garrison gang yesterday. She was the only survivor. This announcement prompted concerned looks and a few low whistles. Those boys need hanging, muttered one cowboy, an older man with a silvery mustache. Sheriff's on it, Pete, Xavier assured him, but until they're caught, we'll be extra vigilant. No one rides alone, especially near the southern boundary, and someone stays within earshot of the main house at all times. The protective measure wasn't lost on Fiona. Xavier was ensuring her safety without making her feel like a burden. As the men dispersed to their evening activities, Xavier lingered behind, helping Fiona gather the empty plates despite her protests. You don't need to do this, she said as he stacked bowls efficiently. I'm perfectly capable, I know you are, he interrupted gently. But my mother taught me that shared work makes for a stronger home. I won't ask you to do anything I wouldn't do myself. The simple statement revealed more about Xavier Hammond's character than a dozen flowery declarations might have. Fiona found herself studying his profile as he carried dishes to the wash basin, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny creases at the corners of his eyes that hinted at smiles more frequent than she'd yet witnessed. Hank mentioned you've lived here your entire life, she said, searching for safe conversation. Born in this very house, Xavier confirmed, though it was half the size then. My father added on as the ranch grew and the family expanded. You have siblings, a shadow crossed his face. Had. A brother, younger by 2 years, James. He died in '68, cavalry. I'm sorry, Fiona said, understanding immediately that James Hammond had been a casualty of the recent war. Xavier acknowledged her sympathy with a nod. He was always the adventurous one. Couldn't wait to see more of the world than Wyoming territory. I sometimes wonder if he'd have come back to the ranch eventually, once he'd had his fill of wandering. Do you ever wish you'd wandered more yourself? Fiona asked, genuinely curious about this man who seemed so deeply rooted to his land. Xavier considered the question seriously as he rolled up his sleeves to help with the washing. I went to school in Denver for a few years, traveled to Chicago once on cattle business. That was enough to show me that what I truly wanted was right here all along. Some would call that limited ambition, Fiona observed, immediately regretting her boldness, but Xavier didn't take offense. Instead, he smiled a real smile that transformed his face entirely. Some might. Others would call it knowing your own mind. There's ambitious men aplenty rushing about this country, Fiona. Someone needs to stay put and build something lasting. The conviction in his voice stirred something in Fiona's chest. In Boston, she had been surrounded by men whose ambitions centered on wealth, status, political connections, always reaching for the next rung on society's ladder. Xavier's ambition was different but no less powerful. To build, to steward, to create something enduring from the wild land around them. They worked in companionable silence for a while, establishing an easy rhythm, Fiona washing, Xavier drying and putting away, already familiar with where everything belonged. You mentioned you were a governess in Boston, Xavier said eventually. What did that entail? I taught the Lawson children, 3 girls and a boy, everything from reading and mathematics to French and proper deportment. Fiona smiled at the memory of her former charges. They were good children, eager to learn. I started with them after finishing my own education at Miss Porter's school in Connecticut. You're well educated then, Xavier observed. For a woman, yes, Fiona replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her tone, though not as thoroughly as a man might be. That wasn't a criticism, Xavier said quickly, just an observation. Education is valuable regardless of gender. He hesitated before adding, we have a small school in Sweetwater Springs, only about 20 children at present but growing. The teacher, Miss Wilson, mentioned she's overwhelmed trying to manage all ages alone. Fiona glanced at him, understanding his implication. Are you suggesting that might be a more suitable position for me than housekeeping? I'm suggesting you have options, Xavier corrected. Your current arrangement here can last as long as you need while you consider them. The generosity of his statement warmed Fiona. Thank you. I'll certainly inquire when we go to town tomorrow. As they finished the cleaning, Fiona found herself relaxing in Xavier's presence in a way she hadn't expected. There was something reassuring about his straightforward manner, his lack of pretense. In Boston, social interactions had been layered with subtle meanings and unspoken expectations. Here, with Xavier Hammond, words seemed to mean exactly what they said. Later that evening, after Xavier had retired to his office to review the ranch accounts, Fiona sat in the main room with a book selected from his surprisingly extensive library. The volume of Tennyson's poetry was well worn, with certain pages marked by slips of paper. She found herself wondering which poems were Xavier's favorites and why. The crackling fire and comfortable chair soon made her eyelids heavy. Just as she was considering retiring to her room, the door to Xavier's office opened. Still awake? He asked, looking tired himself. Barely, Fiona admitted with a small smile. Your library is quite tempting, though. Xavier crossed to the bookshelf, running his fingers along the spines with obvious affection. My mother's influence. She insisted on books being as necessary as flour and salt in a proper home. A woman of discernment, Fiona said, rising from her chair. I should thank you again for today, Xavier, for everything. No thanks needed, he replied, his gaze lingering on her face in a way that made her heart beat a little faster. Get some rest, Fiona. Tomorrow will be a full day. The journey to Sweetwater Springs the next morning revealed more of the spectacular Wyoming landscape. Early September had painted the rolling hills in golden hues, with patches of late wildflowers adding splashes of purple and yellow. The mountains in the distance wore the first dusting of snow on their highest peaks, a harbinger of the winter to come. Xavier drove a sturdy wagon rather than riding, explaining that they'd need the space for supplies and anything they might recover from the stagecoach site. Fiona sat beside him on the wooden seat, acutely aware of his proximity as the wagon jolted over the rutted road. Sheriff Taylor sent word that they recovered some luggage from the attack, Xavier told her as they neared town. Not much, but perhaps your trunk survived. That would be wonderful, Fiona said, trying not to get her hopes up. Though I've managed well enough with your mother's clothing. Xavier glanced at her, a hint of approval in his expression. That green becomes you. My mother would be pleased to see her things being used rather than gathering dust. The compliment, casual as it was, brought a flush to Fiona's cheeks. She was saved from responding by their arrival at the outskirts of Sweetwater Springs. The town was larger than Fiona had expected, with a proper main street lined with businesses, a general store, hotel, bank, and several saloons among them. People moved purposefully along the boardwalks, and wagons and riders created a steady flow of traffic on the wide dirt street. Xavier guided the wagon to a hitching post in front of the sheriff's office. Let's check on your belongings first, he suggested, coming around to help Fiona down. His hand was warm and strong as it closed around hers, and for a brief moment, Fiona found herself reluctant to let go once her feet touched the ground. She released him quickly, smoothing her skirts to hide her momentary confusion. Sheriff Taylor proved to be a barrel-chested man with a neatly trimmed beard and intelligent eyes. He greeted Xavier with obvious respect. Hammond, good to see you. His gaze shifted to Fiona. This must be the young lady Hank mentioned. Madam, I'm mighty sorry about your ordeal. Thank you, Sheriff, Fiona replied. I understand you may have recovered some items from the stagecoach. Indeed, we did. The sheriff gestured to a small collection of luggage in the corner of his office. Not much left unlooted, but we found a trunk with the lock still intact. Initials FP. On the side, Fiona's heart leapt with relief as she spotted her trunk among the recovered items. That's mine, I can't believe it survived. Locke probably saved it, the sheriff observed. Those boys tend to go for easy pickings first. By the time my deputies arrived, they were long gone. Any leads on their whereabouts? Xavier asked. Sheriff Taylor shook his head grimly. Nothing solid. They've been hitting targets across 3 counties, always well organized, in and out quick. He lowered his voice slightly. Between us, I think they've got someone feeding them information about valuable shipments and passenger lists. An inside man at the stage company, Xavier frowned, or the telegraph office or the banks, the sheriff sighed. Hard to know who to trust these days. While the men discussed the gang's activities, Fiona examined her trunk, relieved to find it apparently undamaged. The heavy brass lock had indeed protected its contents. We can load this in the wagon for you, Miss Prescott, Sheriff Taylor offered. And I'd be obliged if you could write down anything you remember about the attack, descriptions of the men, anything they said or did that might help us identify them. Of course, Fiona agreed, though I'm afraid I was too frightened to notice many details. Anything at all might help, the sheriff assured her. We'll get these bastards, pardon my language, madam, sooner or later. After providing what limited information she could recall about the attack, Fiona and Xavier continued their errands around town. The general store provided the supplies needed for the ranch. Along with fabric and notions, Fiona requested to make herself a few more suitable garments. As they worked through their list, Fiona became increasingly aware of the curious glances directed their way. Xavier Hammond was clearly well known in Sweetwater Springs, and his appearance with an unfamiliar woman was causing quiet speculation. People are staring, she murmured as they exited the mercantile. Xavier looked untroubled. Small towns run on gossip. By supper time, there'll be at least 3 different theories about who you are and why you're here. That doesn't bother you. Truth has a way of outlasting rumors, he replied with a shrug. Besides, I've never much cared what people think so long as my conscience is clear. His indifference to social opinion was refreshing after Boston society's obsession with appearances. Fiona found herself admiring this quality even as she remained conscious of the potential damage to her reputation. Their next stop was the schoolhouse, a modest wooden building at the edge of town. As Xavier had mentioned, Miss Wilson was indeed overwhelmed, attempting to teach reading to young children while simultaneously supervising arithmetic for older students. The harried young teacher brightened considerably when Xavier explained Fiona's qualifications and potential interest in assisting. "Oh, that would be heaven sent," Miss Wilson exclaimed. "I've been begging the town council for an assistant since spring." She gave Fiona an appraising look. "You've taught before, multiple subjects. 4 years as a governess to children aged 5 through 12, Fiona confirmed. All standard subjects plus music and French. Miss Wilson looked as though she might weep with joy. When could you start? Fiona glanced at Xavier, uncertain how to proceed. I'm currently assisting at the Hammond Ranch while their housekeeper is away, perhaps once she returns. Of course. Miss Wilson nodded rapidly. Even a few days each week would be tremendously helpful if Mr. Hammond could spare you. Xavier, who had been observing the exchange quietly, spoke up. We could arrange something. Perhaps 3 mornings a week to start. The solution satisfied both women, and arrangements were made for Fiona to begin the following week. As they left the schoolhouse, Fiona felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation about this new opportunity. You didn't have to do that, she said as they walked back toward the wagon. I know you need help at the ranch. The ranch has managed before and will manage again, Xavier replied. Besides, those children need education more than my cowboys need fancy meals. Your cowboys seemed quite appreciative of last night's meal, Fiona pointed out with a smile. They'd be appreciative of hardtack and jerky after a day's work, Xavier countered, though his eyes crinkled with amusement. Don't let their compliments go to your head. Their final stop was the Silver Slipper, not to inquire about employment, but because Xavier insisted Fiona should see firsthand what she had narrowly avoided. Even in daylight, the establishment exuded an atmosphere that made Fiona instinctively uncomfortable. Gaudy painted signs advertised girls. Girls, girls, alongside promises of the finest whiskey in the territory. Through the swinging doors, she could glimpse a long bar, gaming tables, and women in scandalously revealing attire circulating among the patrons. I see your point, Fiona said quietly, turning away from the sight. I was naive to believe their advertisement. Not naive, Xavier corrected her, just trusting. There's a difference. He guided her back toward their wagon with a gentle hand at her elbow. The world takes advantage of trust too often, but that doesn't mean trust itself is foolish. As they drove back toward the ranch in the late afternoon light, Fiona felt a curious mixture of emotions. Relief at recovering her trunk and securing potential employment. Gratitude for Xavier's continued generosity. And something else, she wasn't quite ready to name, a warmth that bloomed in her chest whenever he looked at her with those thoughtful gray eyes. The days fell into a comfortable pattern after that. Mornings found Fiona in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the ranch hands and setting bread to rise for the day's meals. 3 days a week, Xavier would drive her to town for her teaching duties, using the opportunity to conduct his own business while she worked with the children. The other days, Fiona threw herself into managing the Hammond household. She mended linens, preserved late summer vegetables from the kitchen garden, and undertook a thorough cleaning of rooms that Mrs. Abernathy hadn't reached before her departure. In the evenings, she often sat with Xavier in the main room, sometimes reading silently, other times discussing books or current events gleaned from newspapers that arrived sporadically from Cheyenne. 2 weeks into this arrangement, a fierce autumn storm descended upon the region, bringing driving rain that turned the roads to mud and made travel impossible. Xavier declared it too dangerous for anyone to venture far from the ranch buildings. We've lost 3 men in floods over the years, he explained as they watched sheets of rain lash the windows. Not worth the risk. Confined to the house, Fiona used the opportunity to tackle a project she'd been contemplating, reorganizing Xavier's mother's recipes into a proper cookbook for the household. The task kept her occupied at the kitchen table most of the morning, while Xavier worked on ranch accounts nearby. The comfortable silence between them was broken only by the storm's fury, and the occasional question as they worked on their respective tasks. Fiona found herself stealing glances at Xavier when he was absorbed in his ledgers, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the careful precision of his handwriting, the absent way he pushed his hair back from his forehead. You're staring, Xavier observed without looking up, a hint of amusement in his voice. Fiona felt heat rise to her cheeks. I was just wondering how a rancher comes to have such elegant penmanship. Xavier set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. My mother again. She insisted that a man's handwriting reflected his character. Sloppy writing suggested a sloppy mind in her estimation. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. A fond smile softened his features. Educated back east before she married my father and came west. She could quote Shakespeare while churning butter and never saw any contradiction in being both cultured and capable of practical work. I think I would have liked her very much, Fiona said sincerely. She would have liked you too. Xavier's gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary. You remind me of her in some ways. The comparison was clearly meant as high praise, and Fiona felt unexpectedly touched. Thank you, that means a great deal coming from you. A crash of thunder broke the moment, making them both jump. Rain began to leak through a previously unnoticed crack in the ceiling near the fireplace. Damn, Xavier muttered, rising quickly to retrieve a bucket. Thought we'd fixed all these spots last spring. Fiona hurried to help, grabbing towels to soak up the water already pooling on the wooden floor. As they worked to contain the leak, another began in the corner of the room and then a third near the staircase. "Is this normal?" Fiona asked, slightly alarmed by the home's sudden vulnerability. "In a storm this severe, yes," Xavier admitted, looking frustrated. "The house is solid, but it's nearly 30 years old in the original sections. Weather finds new weaknesses every season." By midday, they had positioned buckets and pans under every leak, but the storm showed no signs of abating. The wind howled around the eaves, and the temperature dropped noticeably as cold air pushed through every crack. "We should light fires in all the rooms," Xavier decided. "Keep the dampness from settling in the walls." While he tended to the fireplaces, Fiona prepared a hearty stew and cornbread, knowing the cowboys in the bunkhouse would welcome hot food when they ventured across the yard for their evening meal. As she worked, the kitchen filled with warmth and savory aromas that somehow made the storm outside seem less threatening. There was something deeply satisfying about creating comfort in the midst of nature's fury. Xavier returned from checking on the men, soaked to the skin despite the short distance between buildings. Fiona immediately handed him a towel. "You need to change before you catch your death," she scolded, sounding remarkably like her own mother had when Fiona returned home damp from walks in Boston's frequent rain. "Yes, madam," Xavier replied with mock seriousness, though his eyes danced with amusement at her concerned tone. "After I bring in more firewood, we're going through it faster than usual with all the rooms heated." "At least take a dry coat," Fiona insisted, retrieving his spare from the hook by the door. Their hands brushed as she passed him the garment, and Fiona felt that now familiar flutter in her chest at the contact. She turned away quickly, busying herself with stirring the stew to hide her reaction. The storm continued unabated into the evening. After the ranch hands had eaten and returned to the bunkhouse, Xavier and Fiona sat before the main room's fireplace, listening to the rain hammer against the roof and windows. "Reminds me of the blizzard of '67, Xavier commented, sipping the coffee Fiona had prepared. "Trapped inside for 3 days straight. By the end, my father was threatening to sleep in the barn rather than hear another word from any of us." Fiona laughed, drawing her feet up under her in the armchair. "My father was the same during winter storms. He'd retreat to his study with strict instructions not to disturb him unless the house was literally collapsing." "Men need space to breathe sometimes," Xavier said, "though I'll admit this confinement is considerably more pleasant than most I've experienced." The simple compliment warmed Fiona more than the fire. "I've enjoyed today as well, despite the leaking roof and damp floors. You've adapted remarkably well to ranch life," Xavier observed. "Many women would be complaining bitterly about now. What good would complaining do?" "The rain would still fall, the roof would still leak," Fiona shrugged. "Besides, there's something rather cozy about being safe inside while the elements rage." Xavier studied her thoughtfully over the rim of his cup. "You continue to surprise me, Fiona Prescott." "How so?" "Most Eastern women I've encountered view the West as a hardship to be endured until they can return to civilization. You seem to find something worthwhile in it." Fiona considered his observation. "Perhaps because I came with few expectations. Or perhaps because the hardships here are honest ones, whether distance, physical labor. In Boston, the challenges were often of human making social expectations, artificial constraints, judgments based on circumstances beyond one's control. Like finding oneself suddenly without funds or family." Xavier asked gently, precisely. Fiona stared into the fire. "When my parents died and our financial situation was revealed, former friends became suddenly distant. Invitations ceased. Even relatives found reasons why they couldn't possibly offer assistance." The bitterness she'd thought long buried colored her voice. "At least a storm doesn't pretend to be your friend before destroying your roof." Xavier's low chuckle surprised her. "That's one way of looking at it." "I'm sorry," Fiona said, embarrassed by her outburst. "That sounded rather ungrateful, didn't it? After all, if not for those circumstances, I wouldn't be here now." "And would that be so terrible?" Xavier asked, his voice dropping to a softer register. Being here, I mean, the question hung between them, carrying weight beyond its simple words. Fiona met his gaze across the firelit space. No, she said truthfully, not terrible at all. Something shifted in Xavier's expression, a softening, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. He opened his mouth as if to speak further, but a tremendous crack of thunder directly overhead made them both start. The moment broken, Xavier rose to check the leaking spots around the room. Fiona remained in her chair, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs that had nothing to do with the storm's fury. That night, as she lay listening to the rain continue its assault on the roof, Fiona admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny for days. She was falling in love with Xavier Hammond. The realization should have terrified her. She had known the man barely 3 weeks, and her position in his household was temporary at best. Yet instead of fear, she felt a curious sense of rightness, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally sliding into place. Xavier's quiet strength, his integrity, his unexpected gentleness, these qualities had worked their way into her heart so gradually she had scarcely noticed, until it was too late to guard against them. What she couldn't know, couldn't even dare to hope, was whether Xavier might feel anything similar toward her. Morning brought watery sunshine and the aftermath of the storm's destruction. Fences had been damaged, a section of the bunkhouse roof had partially collapsed, and the road to town was completely impassable. "We'll be isolated for at least a few days," Xavier announced after surveying the damage with Hank. The creeks overflowed its banks and taken out the bridge on the main road. Fiona nodded, understanding what this meant for her teaching duties. "I'll send a note with the first rider who can get through. Miss Wilson will understand." The next several days were consumed with repair work. Even Fiona found herself pressed into service, holding boards in place while Xavier hammered or mixing mortar for chimney repairs. The physical labor was exhausting but oddly satisfying, especially when she could see tangible results of her efforts. On the third evening after the storm, with most of the essential repairs completed, Xavier surprised Fiona by announcing they would dine alone in the main house rather than with the men in the bunkhouse. "They're celebrating the repairs with some whiskey Hank had stashed away," he explained. Not really an atmosphere for a lady. Fiona had prepared a simpler meal than usual, anticipating fewer mouths to feed. Now she found herself wishing she had something more special to offer for what felt suspiciously like a private dinner. Xavier seemed to read her thoughts. "The food is perfect," he assured her as they sat at the small table in the kitchen rather than the larger one in the dining room. "And the company even better." The compliment brought color to Fiona's cheeks. She had taken extra care with her appearance that evening, wearing one of the dresses she had made from the fabric purchased in town and arranging her hair more carefully than usual. They ate in companionable conversation, discussing the repairs still needed and plans for preparing the ranch for the coming winter. As Fiona served apple pie for dessert made from the last of the stored fall apples, Xavier broached a new subject. "Mrs. Abernathy sent word today. Her sister is recovering, but slowly. She doesn't expect to return before the first snow." Fiona set down her fork. "I see, that's unfortunate for her sister, though I'm glad to hear she's improving." "It presents a dilemma for us," Xavier continued. "The school board has formally offered you the assistant teaching position, with pay to begin immediately if you accept. But with Mrs. Abernathy absent, the ranch still needs someone to manage the household." "I see," Fiona repeated, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "I could perhaps continue dividing my time, though with winter approaching, travel between the ranch and town will become more difficult." Xavier nodded, his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "There is another possibility, though I'm not sure how you'll receive it." Fiona's heart began to beat faster. "What possibility?" Xavier set his napkin aside and met her gaze directly. "In the 3 weeks you've been here, Fiona, this house has become more of a home than it's been in years. The men are happier, the place runs more smoothly, and I—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. I've found myself looking forward to evenings by the fire with you in a way I haven't anticipated anything in a very long time." Fiona held her breath, scarcely daring to hope where this might be leading. "What I'm trying to say, poorly," Xavier continued, "is that I'd like you to stay. Not as a housekeeper or a temporary arrangement, but permanently, as my wife." The words hung in the air between them. Fiona's mind raced, even as her heart seemed to stop entirely. "Your wife," she finally managed. "Xavier, we've known each other less than a month." "I'm aware of that," he acknowledged. "And if you need more time, I understand, but I know my own mind, Fiona. I knew at the moment I saw you stand up from behind that overturned wagon, covered in dust but with your chin held high." "You can't possibly have been thinking of marriage then," Fiona protested, though a warmth was spreading through her chest at his words. "Not consciously, perhaps," Xavier admitted. "But something in me recognized something in you, a spirit that matched my own." He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "I'm not a man given to romantic flights of fancy, Fiona. I'm offering you a partnership, a life built together. It won't always be easy, but I believe it could be good, very good." Fiona looked at his outstretched hand, then into his face, earnest, vulnerable, yet still maintaining that quiet strength that had drawn her from the beginning. "What about the teaching position?" she asked, playing for time as her thoughts raced. "You could still teach if you wanted." "We'd work out the logistics." Xavier's lips curved in a slight smile. "I wouldn't ask you to give up something that brings you fulfillment." The consideration inherent in that statement touched Fiona deeply. How many men would think of a woman's need for fulfillment beyond marriage? "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to answer now," Xavier said gently. "Take whatever time you need to be certain." But even as he offered her time, Fiona realized she didn't need it. The feelings that had been growing within her these past weeks crystallized into certainty. Life with Xavier Hammond would have challenges, yes, but it would also have purpose, partnership, and the kind of honest love she had always hoped might exist. "Yes," she said simply. Xavier blinked as if he hadn't quite heard correctly. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Xavier Hammond." Fiona's voice grew stronger with each word. "Not because I need a home or protection, but because I've come to love who you are and the life you've built here." Xavier's face transformed with a joy so pure it nearly took Fiona's breath away. He rose from his chair and came around the table, taking her hands and drawing her to her feet. "I love you, Fiona Prescott," he said, the words clearly unfamiliar on his tongue but no less sincere for it. "I think I've been waiting for you without even knowing it." When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, a question, an offering. Fiona answered by sliding her arms around his neck, drawing him closer. The kiss deepened, carrying all the unspoken emotions of the past weeks. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have a ring to give you yet," he said apologetically. "I don't need a ring," Fiona replied, "though I wouldn't object to another kiss." Xavier laughed, the sound rich and free in a way she hadn't heard before. "That I can provide in abundance." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and into town, generating reactions ranging from Hank's approving nod to raised eyebrows from some of Sweetwater Springs' more conservative residents. "Let them talk," Xavier said when Fiona mentioned the gossip. "They'll find something new to cluck about soon enough." With winter approaching rapidly, they agreed on a simple ceremony before the first heavy snows made travel impossible. The small church in Sweetwater Springs would host the wedding, with a celebration afterward at the ranch for the hands and closest friends. Fiona wrote to her few remaining contacts in Boston, including her former employers, the Lawsons. Their warm reply, including a generous wedding gift, brought tears to her eyes. "They were always kind to me," she explained to Xavier as she showed him the letter. "Even after everyone else turned away. Then they'll always be welcome in our home," Xavier promised, kissing her forehead. The teaching position was temporarily set aside, with Miss Wilson's blessing and a promise that Fiona could join the school in the spring if she wished. Winter would make daily travel too difficult anyway, the teacher acknowledged, and newlyweds should have time together. The night before their wedding, Fiona sat at the small desk in what would soon no longer be her room, writing in the journal she had kept since arriving in Wyoming. Her thoughts spilled onto the page in a rush of emotion. Tomorrow, I marry Xavier Hammond and begin a new chapter in a story I never could have imagined 3 months ago. When I left Boston, I was seeking merely survival, a position, shelter, the basic necessities of life. Instead, I have found love, purpose, and a home in the truest sense of the word. The West has stripped away everything superficial and forced me to discover what truly matters. In Xavier, I have found a partner who sees me completely and values what he sees. His strength is not just in his capable hands or his determined spirit, but in his willingness to be vulnerable, to share both burdens and joys. I know there will be hardships ahead. Winter storms, dry summers, the 1,000 natural challenges this land presents. But I face them now not with fear but with anticipation, knowing that together we can weather whatever comes. She paused, pen hovering over the page, then added one final thought. When I first arrived at this ranch, I asked to be a servant in Xavier's home. He looked at me and said I would be the lady of this home instead. Tomorrow, I become exactly that, not through artifice or social position, but through love freely given and received. I can imagine no greater blessing. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with the first dusting of snow outlining the mountains in the distance. Fiona dressed with care in a gown she had made herself from cream-colored fabric ordered specially from Cheyenne. Simple but elegant, it suited both the occasion and her new life. Miss Wilson helped with her hair, weaving late-season wildflowers into the chestnut waves. "You make a beautiful bride, Fiona," she said, stepping back to admire her work, "and an even more beautiful example of courage." "Courage?" Fiona questioned, adjusting her lace collar, "to come west alone. To build a new life, to open your heart again after loss." Miss Wilson squeezed her hand. "Many would have crumbled under half of what you've faced." The small church filled with well-wishers' ranch hands in their Sunday best, townspeople curious about the Eastern woman who had captured Xavier Hammond's heart. Even Sheriff Taylor and his deputies taking a rare break from their pursuit of the still-at-large garrison gang. When Fiona entered on Hank's arm, the foreman having proudly accepted the role of giving her away, she had eyes only for Xavier, waiting at the altar. He had trimmed his beard and wore a new suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. But it was his expression that caught and held her attention, a mixture of awe, joy, and unmistakable love that made her heart swell. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, with traditional vows spoken in clear, confident voices. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier's kiss was restrained but tender, mindful of their audience yet still conveying his devotion. The celebration at the ranch afterward was anything but restrained. The Cowboys had decorated the bunkhouse with paper streamers and wildflowers, and someone had procured a fiddle. Food and drink flowed freely, with even the most taciturn ranch hands offering heartfelt, if sometimes awkwardly phrased, congratulations. "Never seen the boss so happy," one young cowboy confided to Fiona as she served cake. "You're good for him, madam." As evening approached, the guests gradually dispersed, the married couples and town residents heading home, the Cowboys tactfully making themselves scarce around the property. Eventually, Fiona and Xavier found themselves alone in the main house for the first time as husband and wife. "Well, Mrs. Hammond," Xavier said softly, taking her hands in his. "How does it feel?" "Wonderful," Fiona replied truthfully. "And surprisingly natural, as if this is exactly where I was always meant to be." Xavier's smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I felt the same way watching you today, like everything in my life was leading to you." Their kiss was deeper now, uninhibited by watchful eyes filled with the promise of the night ahead. When they finally drew apart, Xavier led her not upstairs but to the main room, where a fire crackled invitingly in the hearth. "I have something for you," he said, retrieving a small wooden box from his desk. A wedding gift. Inside, Fiona found a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. Xavier, it's beautiful, she breathed, admiring how the firelight caught in the stone's facets. It was my mother's, he explained as he slid it onto her finger. My father gave it to her on their 10th anniversary after the ranch had finally begun to prosper. I'll treasure it, Fiona promised, deeply moved by the family connection. There's something else. Xavier reached into his pocket and produced a folded document. The deed to the Triple H, I had it redrawn in both our names. Fiona stared at the paper in shock. Xavier, this is too much. The ranch is your legacy and now it's our legacy, he interrupted gently. Whatever we build here, we build together. Equal partners, remember? Tears welled in Fiona's eyes at the profound meaning behind the gesture. In a time when women rarely held property in their own right, Xavier was willingly sharing everything he had built. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't need to say anything, Xavier assured her, drawing her into his arms. Just help me make this ranch everything it can be. Help me build something that will last beyond us. Their kiss sealed this promise, a covenant more binding than the marriage vows they had spoken earlier. When Xavier lifted her into his arms to carry her upstairs to their bedroom, Fiona felt not just desire but a profound sense of coming home. As winter settled fully over the Wyoming landscape, the Hammond Ranch became a haven of warmth and light. Xavier and Fiona established rhythms and routines that blended their individual strengths, his practical knowledge of the land and cattle, her organizational skills and attention to detail. Together, they pored over seed catalogs for the spring garden, planned improvements to the house, and discussed expanding the operation to include sheep as well as cattle. In the evenings, they continued their tradition of reading by the fire, sometimes aloud to each other from favorite books. Xavier's appreciation for poetry surprised and delighted Fiona, especially when she discovered his talent for reciting Tennyson from memory. My mother insisted, he explained when she expressed amazement at his flawless recitation of Ulysses. Said poetry civilizes the soul. Made James and me learn a new poem every month, even in the busy seasons. She was a wise woman, Fiona said, resting her head against his shoulder as they sat side by side on the sofa. I wish I could have known her. She would have adored you, Xavier assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. Almost as much as I do. When the first major blizzard of the season hit in late December, trapping them indoors for 4 days straight, Fiona understood what Xavier had meant about the challenges of winter isolation. Yet even as the wind howled and snow piled against the windows, she found joy in the enforced closeness, cooking together, playing chess, and sharing stories of their childhoods. It was during this storm, as they lay tangled together beneath thick quilts while the world outside turned white, that Fiona shared her suspicion that their family might be expanding sooner than they had planned. A baby. Xavier's voice was hushed with wonder as his hand moved to rest gently on her still flat stomach. You're certain? Not absolutely, Fiona admitted, but I'm nearly 2 months late and there are other signs. Xavier's face transformed with such profound joy that Fiona felt tears spring to her eyes. A child, he whispered. Our child. His kiss was reverent, almost worshipful, before he gathered her carefully into his arms as if she had suddenly become fragile as spun glass. You know I've delivered calves and foals, Fiona reminded him with a laugh. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'm not made of porcelain. Humor me, Xavier requested, still holding her gently, at least until I get used to the idea. By spring, there was no hiding Fiona's condition, though she continued to manage the household and even began teaching 2 afternoons a week when the roads cleared enough for travel. The ranch hands treated her with an almost comical degree of protective concern, rushing to carry even the lightest packages and constantly offering her chairs. You'd think no woman had ever been with child before, she complained good-naturedly to Xavier after Pete, the oldest cowboy, had practically forced her to sit down while he fetched her a glass of water. They care about you, Xavier pointed out. You've become the heart of this place, Fiona. They just want to make sure you and the little one are well. The little one made his appearance on a perfect June morning in 1877 with sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows and meadowlarks singing in the cottonwoods outside. After 12 hours of labor, attended by the midwife from town and a surprisingly steady-handed Xavier, James William Hammond entered the world with a robust cry that his father declared was strong enough to call cattle. "He has your eyes," Fiona murmured tiredly as she cradled their son, marveling at the tiny features that somehow combined both of them. "And your determination," Xavier replied, still somewhat in awe of the strength his wife had displayed throughout the birth. "Did you see how he fought against the swaddling? That's pure Fiona Prescott stubbornness." "Hammond's stubbornness now," she corrected with a smile. As James grew from infant to toddler, the Hammond ranch prospered alongside him. Xavier's experiment with sheep proved successful, providing wool that commanded premium prices in Eastern markets. Fiona's careful accounting and correspondence opened new business connections that extended their reach beyond Wyoming territory. The house expanded as well, with Xavier adding the nursery wing he had once planned years before and eventually a small schoolroom where Fiona could teach James. And 2 years later, his sister Elizabeth rose. On warm summer evenings, the family often sat on the wide porch Xavier had built as a surprise for Fiona's birthday, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple. Sometimes Hank or other longtime hands would join them, telling the children stories of the early days of the ranch or the adventures of their father before he settled down with the prettiest schoolteacher in the territory. On one such evening, as 4-year-old James played with wooden horses at their feet and baby Elizabeth slept in Fiona's arms, Xavier gazed out over his land with quiet satisfaction. "You ever miss Boston?" he asked suddenly, turning to his wife. "The theaters, the libraries, the society." Fiona considered the question seriously, as she did all things. "I miss certain aspects sometimes," she admitted. "The bookshops particularly, the museums, but not enough to trade any of this." Her gesture encompassed not just the ranch but their children, their life together. Xavier nodded, seeming pleased but not surprised by her answer. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment. "James will be ready for more formal schooling soon, and with the railroad pushing closer every year, Cheyenne isn't such a journey anymore. What are you suggesting?" Fiona asked, curious where this line of thought was leading. "Maybe once or twice a year we could take a trip east, see some of those museums, attend a play, show the children a bit more of the world than just Wyoming, as much as I love it." The thoughtfulness of the suggestion, recognizing her occasional longing for cultural experiences without her having to ask, was so typically Xavier that Fiona felt her heart swell with renewed love for this man who continually surprised her. "I think that would be wonderful," she said, leaning over to kiss him softly. "Though I hope you know that I've never regretted for a moment the path that brought me here, not even when you were hiding behind that wagon, thinking bandits might be your end." Xavier teased, though his eyes remained serious. "Not even then," Fiona confirmed, "because without that moment I might never have found you, never known what it means to truly be home." As the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Xavier Hammond looked at the family he had never expected to have, the beautiful, strong-willed woman who had stumbled into his life, and the children who represented their shared future, and knew with absolute certainty that some things were indeed worth waiting for. Years ago, a young woman had asked to be a servant in his home, and he had declared she would be its lady instead. Now, watching Fiona smile down at their sleeping daughter, Xavier silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought her to that dusty Wyoming road and into his heart. The Triple H Ranch would stand for generations, a testament to what could be built when two people faced life's challenges together, with love as their foundation and the vast western sky as their only limit.